In this video, we're diving deep into the timeless wisdom of Seneca with 15 powerful Stoic tips that will help you take control of your mind, your emotions, and ultimately, your life. If you're ready to unlock the secrets of inner strength, calm, and resilience that have stood the test of time, stick around till the end. These life-changing insights could be exactly what you need to master yourself. Let's get started. Number 1. Limit complaints and negative speech. When it comes to limiting complaints and negative speech, Seneca had some powerful insights that can totally change the way you experience life. Complaining might feel like a natural response to setbacks or frustrations, but here's the thing, it's like pouring salt on an open wound. You might feel a temporary sense of release, but it's fleeting, and often it just keeps you stuck in the same cycle of frustration and negativity. The Stoics, especially Seneca, saw complaining as a form of wasted energy. Every time you gripe about something, you're spending mental effort on things outside of your control, which doesn't lead to anything productive. It's not about suppressing your emotions, though. It's about understanding that by constantly voicing your dissatisfaction, you're reinforcing those negative feelings. Words have power, and when you verbalize complaints, they can amplify the frustration you already feel. It's a loop, and one that's tough to break if you're not mindful. Think about how often our complaints are about things we can't change. The weather's bad. Your boss is in a mood. The traffic's terrible. What can you really do about those things? Not much. But every time you let loose about them, you're throwing yourself into a mental space where you're at war with reality. Seneca believed that accepting the world as it is, and not as you wish it to be, was key to inner peace. Complaining is the opposite of acceptance. It's resisting what's happening. And the more you resist, the more painful it becomes. Now, this doesn't mean you should never speak about your challenges or frustrations. The Stoics weren't about being emotionless robots. But there's a difference between acknowledging a problem and spiraling into a never-ending narrative of how unfair or irritating life is. Complaints often come from a place of feeling helpless, and when you keep voicing them, you're giving more power to that helplessness. It's as if you're telling yourself, over and over, that things are out of your control, and that's not empowering. Seneca would say that the goal is to rise above that. Instead of feeding into the negativity, take a step back and reflect. Ask yourself, does speaking about this issue make it better? Does it change anything? If the answer is no, then why waste your breath? Instead, shift your focus. Speak on things you can change, on things that bring value, even if it's just to yourself. Silence, too, can be powerful. It creates space to reflect, to breathe, and to respond with calm instead of knee-jerk reactions. Negative speech doesn't only affect you, it impacts those around you. It's contagious. Ever notice how being around someone who's constantly complaining brings the whole vibe down? It spreads like wildfire. Stoicism teaches us that we have a responsibility not just to ourselves, but to others in our circle. When we limit our negative speech, we create a more positive, supportive environment, one where people feel encouraged rather than drained. It's not easy, of course. Changing your speech patterns requires mindfulness, and it's something that takes time. The next time you catch yourself complaining, pause. Recognize it. Instead of speaking, take a moment to breathe, and ask yourself if this is really the narrative you want to reinforce. If not, let it go. The world isn't perfect, and neither are we, but we can choose how we speak to it, and how we speak about it. Seneca's way isn't about being passive or indifferent. It's about realizing that true strength lies in controlling what you can, your thoughts, your words, and ultimately, your perspective. Number 2, learn to let go of anger. Learning to let go of anger is like setting down a heavy load you didn't realize you were carrying. Anger, in the moment, feels powerful. It flares up, giving you a burst of energy, a sense of righteousness, even. But that power? It's deceptive. It burns hot, but it leaves behind nothing but ashes. Seneca was wise to this. He saw anger not as strength, but as a kind of madness, something that clouds your judgment and throws you off balance. The thing about anger is it often feels justified. Someone wronged you, a situation spun out of control, and suddenly, you're seething. But Seneca would ask, what does that anger solve? Does it undo the wrong? Does it make the situation any better? Usually, it just digs you deeper into frustration. The Stoics were big on control, not in a domineering sense, but in understanding what's within your power and what's not. Anger is often a response to things you can't control, and letting it fester only chains you to those things. But it's easier said than done, right? Anger can feel like a force of nature, something that sweeps over you before you even realize it. And once you're in its grip, it's tough to shake. That's why the first step is recognizing when it's coming. Seneca believed that if you can catch anger in its early stages, before it's had time to take root, you have a much better chance of letting it go. It's like stopping a storm before it gathers full strength. So, how do you actually let go of anger? It starts with a shift in mindset. Anger thrives on the idea that something shouldn't have happened. But the Stoics teach us that life happens as it happens. The world isn't conspiring against you, and people aren't perfect. Seneca would remind us that getting angry at the nature of things is like getting mad at a river for flowing. It's pointless. Instead, he would encourage us to accept what is, not in a passive, defeated way, but in a way that frees us from the emotional baggage anger brings. Think of it like this: when you hold on to anger, you're gripping something tightly, your fists clenched. Letting go doesn't mean you're okay with whatever made you angry. It means you're choosing not to let that thing dominate your emotions. You're choosing your peace over the fleeting satisfaction that comes from anger. And yes, it can feel like a choice at first, something you have to consciously decide. But over time, it becomes second nature. There's also the element of self-reflection. Seneca was big on this. Anger often comes from ego. We get mad because our pride's been hurt or because we feel disrespected. But when you take a step back and ask yourself, is this really worth my peace? You'll often find the answer is no. Anger feels urgent, like you have to act on it right away, but giving yourself that space to breathe, to reflect, can make all the difference. And here's the thing, anger doesn't just affect you. It spills out onto others. It spreads. You might think you're containing it, but it leaks into your words, your actions, even your body language. Seneca understood that when you're angry, you're not just hurting yourself, you're creating ripples that affect everyone around you. Letting go of anger is not only an act of self-mastery but an act of kindness to those you interact with. In the end, it's about freedom. Anger chains you to whatever triggered it. Letting it go? That's liberation. It's choosing not to be weighed down by things outside your control. And in that choice, you find a kind of strength that anger could never give you. Number 3, find solitude to strengthen the mind. Finding solitude to strengthen the mind isn't about just escaping the noise around you, it's about creating a space where you can really listen to yourself. In today's hyper-connected world, silence feels almost alien, right? We're surrounded by notifications, constant chatter, endless streams of content begging for our attention. But there's something powerful in deliberately stepping back and just being with yourself. This isn't a passive withdrawal, it's an active retreat. When you find solitude, you create room for your mind to breathe, to stretch, to explore thoughts without interruption. It's in these moments of stillness that you start to untangle the mess of thoughts that build up over time. It's like giving your brain a chance to sort through the clutter. Ideas that were half-formed suddenly take shape. Anxieties that were gnawing at you start to lose their grip. The distractions fall away, and what's left is raw, unfiltered you. And that's where the real work begins. But let's be clear, solitude isn't easy. It can feel uncomfortable, even unsettling at first. After all, when was the last time you really sat with your own thoughts without trying to escape into your phone or drown out the silence with music or a podcast? The truth is, it's in these quiet moments that you confront parts of yourself that you may have been avoiding. You might realize things about your habits, your fears, your desires that you've kept buried beneath the surface. And that's a good thing. Seneca, like many Stoics, saw solitude as essential for personal growth. It wasn't just about taking time to be alone, but about cultivating the strength to handle life's challenges with greater resilience. When you spend time in solitude, you're not running from the world, you're preparing to face it head-on. You're sharpening your mind, like a sword being honed on a whetstone. Each moment of quiet reflection makes you a little bit sharper, a little more focused, a little more in control of your reactions. Think of solitude as mental weightlifting. Just like your muscles grow stronger with resistance, your mind becomes stronger when it has to rely on itself. Without external noise to guide your thoughts or shape your feelings, you learn to trust your inner compass. You begin to master the art of self-discipline, of saying no to distractions and yes to deeper focus. And over time, you'll notice that when life throws challenges your way, you handle them with more clarity and calm because you've already practiced being with yourself in the face of discomfort. Some people think of solitude as a luxury, something to indulge in when there's time. But it's not a luxury, it's a necessity for anyone serious about mastering themselves. Solitude is where you forge your mental toughness. It's where you learn to be okay with not having all the answers immediately, to sit with uncertainty without letting it overwhelm you. And here's the kicker, the more comfortable you become in your own company, the less dependent you are on the opinions and approval of others. Solitude strips away the need for validation. You don't need to impress anyone, convince anyone, or measure up to anyone's expectations when it's just you. And that's where true freedom lies, when you can stand strong, confident, and self-assured, even when no one else is around to see it. So, finding solitude isn't about isolation. It's about discovery. It's about carving out a space where your mind can grow, strengthen, and, ultimately, master itself. Number 4, analyze your judgments and assumptions. Analyzing your judgments and assumptions is one of the most transformative Stoic practices, and it's a skill that Seneca often emphasized. But what does it really mean to analyze your judgments? Let's break it down in a way that feels relatable and practical. We all have opinions. We make snap judgments all the time, without even realizing it. You know, those little stories we tell ourselves about people, situations, or even ourselves. But here's the thing, how often do we step back and actually question these thoughts? Stoicism encourages us to do just that. It's like being your own mental detective, constantly investigating the way you see the world. Seneca would suggest that instead of just letting these judgments run wild, unchecked, we slow down and ask, is this thought true? Is this assumption valid? Now, why does this matter? Our judgments shape how we experience life. If you assume the worst about a situation or a person, it colors everything you do after that. You'll act on that assumption, and often, you might find yourself spiraling into frustration or disappointment. When you start analyzing your judgments, you give yourself a chance to rewire how you see things. It's like clearing away the fog from your mind. Suddenly, situations that seemed frustrating or unfair might start to look different, simply because you stopped to question that initial gut reaction. But here's the tricky part, our judgments usually happen fast, so fast we don't even notice them. They feel like truth because they're immediate, instinctive. But that's where the Stoic mindset kicks in. It's not about fighting every thought that pops up, but rather training yourself to pause. Think of it like catching a fish with your bare hands. You won't always grab it right away, but with practice, you'll start noticing those thoughts as they surface. You might think, why did I just assume that person is rude? Where did that thought come from? Is it even accurate? And when you catch yourself like that, it opens the door to understanding yourself better. Seneca was all about this internal awareness. He believed that mastering your mind was the first step toward mastering your life. So, when you find yourself getting worked up over something or jumping to conclusions, that's the moment to apply this technique. Ask yourself, what am I really reacting to here? What's the story I'm telling myself, and is it based on facts or just my own unchecked assumptions? Sometimes, you'll find that your judgment was off base. And that's okay. The point isn't to be perfect, but to get into the habit of recognizing when your mind is playing tricks on you. This practice builds emotional resilience. It makes you more flexible, adaptable. The more you question your assumptions, the less likely you are to get caught up in emotions that don't serve you. So, start paying attention to those snap judgments. Question them, dissect them, and don't be afraid to admit when they're wrong. Over time, you'll notice a shift. You'll react less, and instead, you'll respond with more clarity and calm. It's like giving your brain a much-needed tune-up, and the best part? It's a skill that only gets stronger the more you practice it. Number 5, focus on small daily improvements. When we think about personal growth, it's easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to make huge, sweeping changes to our lives. We dream of a sudden breakthrough, a dramatic shift that turns everything around. But Seneca would tell you something different. He'd say, focus on the small things, the everyday moments that don't seem like much at first glance. These tiny improvements add up. They have a way of sneaking in and making the biggest difference over time. Here's the thing, when you focus on small daily improvements, it's like planting a seed. At first, you might not see anything happening. Days go by, and it feels like all your effort is for nothing. But beneath the surface, things are shifting. Roots are growing. The more you nurture that small habit, the more it strengthens. It's subtle. It's patient. And that's the magic of it. Small, consistent actions may seem almost too simple, but they're powerful precisely because of that simplicity. If you aim for massive changes overnight, you'll likely burn out. But with tiny shifts, you're less likely to run out of steam. You're not trying to turn your life upside down, you're just nudging it forward, bit by bit, each day. There's something almost relaxing in that approach, knowing that you don't have to conquer the world all at once. You just need to show up today. That's it. And that's where Stoicism really shines. The Stoics understood that lasting change doesn't come from grand gestures or sudden leaps. It's about laying one brick at a time, carefully and mindfully. It's not flashy. It's not something that people will applaud you for right away. But over time, those bricks build something solid, something unshakable. Seneca would remind you that life is made up of many small moments, not just the big, dramatic ones. And when you start focusing on making just a tiny bit of progress each day, you'll begin to realize how much those small moments matter. You might decide to reflect a little more each night. Or maybe you take a few minutes in the morning to reset your intentions. These aren't monumental tasks, but over time, they create a new rhythm in your life. You start to feel more in control, more balanced. Now, there will be days when you don't feel like doing even the small things. That's natural. But remember, the beauty of focusing on small improvements is that even on tough days, you can still make progress. It doesn't take much to move the needle when the needle is right there in front of you. Seneca might say that discipline isn't about pushing yourself to extremes, it's about showing up, even when it's hard, and taking one small step forward. That's all it takes. The Stoic approach to self-mastery is all about sustainability. It's not about a sprint to the finish line, but a steady pace. You keep walking, even if some days it feels like a crawl. And soon enough, you look back and realize how far you've come. That's the Stoic secret, focusing on small, Daily improvements might seem modest, but over time, those tiny shifts create monumental change. Just start with today, and trust that the rest will follow. Number 6. Practice generosity without expectation. When we think about generosity, there's often this hidden layer of expectation beneath it. You know, that unspoken thought that if you give, maybe you'll get something in return, whether it's gratitude, recognition, or even just the warm fuzzies. But Seneca? He'd tell you that true generosity doesn't work that way. It's not about giving, only to receive. In fact, it's about practicing generosity without expecting anything back. That's where real freedom comes in. At first, this might sound a little counterintuitive. After all, we're wired to seek some sort of outcome from our actions. You give a compliment and hope it brightens someone's day. You help someone out, and maybe deep down, you're hoping for a thank you or at least some acknowledgement. But what if we let go of that expectation? What if we could give, simply because giving is an act of its own reward? This is where Stoicism, and Seneca's wisdom, comes into play. Seneca believed that the true value of generosity isn't tied to any response. It's not about how the other person reacts or what comes back to you. Instead, it's about the act itself, the intention behind it. When you give without strings attached, you're free from the disappointment that comes when expectations aren't met. You're not waiting for that thank you or that recognition. You're just giving. And there's something deeply liberating about that. Think of generosity like pouring water from a cup. If your cup is full, you can share some of it, right? But you don't get upset if someone doesn't pour anything back into your cup. You gave what you had to give, and that's enough. It's a pure exchange, without keeping score or holding onto any hidden hopes. This is how Stoics approach generosity. It's about contributing to the world around you because you can, because you want to, and because it aligns with your values, not because you're waiting for something in return. Now, does this mean you should let people take advantage of your kindness? Not at all. Practicing generosity without expectation doesn't mean being naive or letting people walk all over you. It just means that when you give, you do so from a place of strength and contentment, not from a desire for validation or payback. The real beauty of this kind of generosity is how it changes your relationship with giving. It stops being transactional. You're not keeping a mental tally of how much you've done or who owes you what. You just do what feels right in the moment, and then you let it go. It's a bit like breathing. You don't expect anything for each breath you take. You just do it because it's part of life. The same goes for generosity. When you give freely, it becomes a natural part of who you are, not something you do to get something in return. And here's the kicker: by practicing generosity without expectation, you might find that you actually get more in return. Not in the material sense, but in the way it shapes your mindset. You become more content, less reliant on external validation. Your happiness isn't tied to how others react, but rather to the simple fact that you're living in alignment with your values. That's the kind of mastery Seneca was talking about. A freedom that comes from within, by giving without any need for return. So, next time you feel the urge to give, check in with yourself. Are you giving because it feels right? Or because you're hoping for something in return? Shift your focus, let go of the outcome, and watch how that small act of generosity begins to shift something bigger inside of you. Number 7. Avoid dependency on luxuries. Avoiding dependency on luxuries isn't just about living like a monk or shunning every modern convenience. It's more about making sure that you're not so wrapped up in comforts that they start to control you. The Stoics, especially Seneca, believe that when you rely too much on luxuries, you lose a piece of your freedom. Sure, it feels great to have nice things, to treat yourself, to live a bit lavishly now and then. But what happens when you start needing them? What happens when your comfort zone becomes so cushy that stepping outside of it feels unbearable? Seneca often talked about how we should train ourselves to be okay with discomfort. Not because discomfort is inherently good, but because if you can handle discomfort, then you can handle anything. Let's face it, life is unpredictable. One day you might be soaking in luxury, but the next, it could all be gone. If you've trained yourself to be fine without the extras, losing them won't break you. You'll still be centered, still grounded. But if you've gotten used to having all these comforts, losing them might feel like the world is ending. Think about it this way, luxuries are like a warm, cozy blanket on a cold day. It's nice to have, but if you're so used to the blanket that you can't get through the cold without it, then you've got a problem. The cold hasn't changed, your resilience to it has. And in a sense, that's what Seneca's getting at. It's not the luxury that's the issue, it's the way we latch onto it. The more we rely on external comforts, the more we weaken our internal strength. And when we weaken that inner strength, we become vulnerable to anxiety, to fear, and to feeling like we don't have enough. Luxury can create this illusion that we need more and more to feel satisfied, but Stoicism pushes back against that. It teaches that real satisfaction comes from within. If you're stable on the inside, no external circumstance can shake you. But let's be honest, avoiding luxury doesn't mean you can't enjoy the finer things in life. You don't have to give up your favorite coffee or that nice meal out. The key is to check in with yourself and make sure those things haven't turned into necessities. It's fine to enjoy them, but the problem starts when you think you need them. Seneca suggests that, from time to time, you should test yourself. Maybe go without that favorite coffee or skip that fancy dinner. See how you feel. Can you handle it? This practice isn't about depriving yourself, it's about proving to yourself that you're strong enough without those things. It builds confidence. It builds resilience. It reminds you that you're the one in control, not your circumstances. If you can enjoy the luxuries and then let them go without feeling anxious, then you've mastered them. And that's the whole point, mastering yourself rather than being mastered by external comforts. By avoiding dependency on luxuries, you're essentially saying, I'm good either way. With or without the extras, I'm still me. You become adaptable. You become free. And in that freedom, you find a deeper sense of contentment than any luxury could ever offer. Number 8. Detach from external approval. Detaching from external approval is one of those Stoic principles that sounds simple but can be surprisingly tough to put into practice. It's so easy to get caught up in what other people think about you, whether it's your family, friends, or even strangers on the internet. Seneca, however, encourages us to step back and realize that other people's opinions don't define us. They're just that, opinions. And here's the kicker, they're completely outside of our control. So why waste your energy chasing approval when it's like trying to hold water in your hands? You've probably felt it before, the rush of satisfaction when someone compliments you or the sinking feeling when they criticize you. That's normal. But the Stoics would argue that letting these reactions dictate your mood, your decisions, or your sense of self-worth is dangerous territory. The moment you start seeking validation from others, you hand over a piece of your power. Suddenly, your happiness depends on something you can't control, other people's approval, their praise, their recognition. And that's a slippery slope. When you detach from the need for external validation, you reclaim that power. You start to realize that what matters most is how you feel about yourself, not how others see you. Think of it like this, when you're always waiting for someone else to tell you that you're doing great, it's like living in a room where the thermostat is controlled by someone else. You're constantly reacting to their adjustments, too hot, too cold, just right. But when you take charge of your own sense of self, you get to set the temperature. The Stoics teach us to focus on what's within our control, and other people's opinions definitely don't fall into that category. Sure, people are going to have their thoughts, and they're going to share them, often unsolicited. Some will approve, some won't. That's life. But Seneca suggests that the real mastery comes when you can nod, acknowledge what's been said, and move on without letting it sway your core. Praise? Great. Criticism? Fine. Either way, your sense of self remains unshaken. Now, detaching from external approval doesn't mean you become indifferent to everyone around you. You don't need to walk through life with a who cares attitude. Instead, it's about balancing that natural desire to be liked or respected with a deeper, more unshakable sense of who you are. You can still listen to feedback, still take advice, but you're not hanging your self-esteem on whether or not people give you a thumbs up. Their opinion might be interesting, but it's not essential to your inner stability. One of the key insights here is understanding that external approval is fickle. It's always shifting, based on other people's moods, perspectives, or even their own insecurities. Chasing it is like trying to catch the wind, exhausting and ultimately pointless. But when you detach from it, you start to rely on something much sturdier, your own values, your own judgment, your own sense of what's right for you. And that, as Seneca might put it, is where true mastery lies. In the end, by freeing yourself from the need for others to validate your worth, you become less reactive and more grounded. Your actions, your thoughts, your choices, they come from a place of inner strength, not a need for approval. It's liberating. It's empowering. And best of all, it's entirely within your control. Number 9. Limit desires and cravings. Limiting desires and cravings sounds like a bit of a buzzkill at first, right? But hold on, there's a reason the Stoics, especially Seneca, were all about it. The idea isn't that you should never want anything or that you should live in constant denial. It's more about understanding the difference between healthy wants and cravings that can completely take over your mind. Desires, if left unchecked, can become a trap. They lead you around like a leash, and suddenly, you're no longer the one in control. The cravings are. Seneca believed that when you constantly chase after things, whether it's wealth, pleasure, or even status, you end up in a cycle of never-ending pursuit. You get one thing, but it's never enough. You start wanting more, bigger, better. And that's where the real problem starts. You become restless, dissatisfied. You think that by obtaining the next thing, you'll feel complete, but satisfaction never lasts long, does it? The next craving creeps in, and the cycle repeats. The Stoics would tell you, hey, slow down. Is this endless chase really what you want? Desires have a funny way of making you feel like you need them. They whisper, once you have this, you'll be happy. But the Stoics knew that wasn't the case. The more you crave, the more you suffer. You start getting anxious when things don't go your way, frustrated when you don't get what you want, and maybe even bitter when you see someone else with the thing you thought would make you happy. The problem isn't the thing itself, it's the attachment to it. Desires can cloud your judgment, pulling you in directions you might not even want to go. Now, limiting your desires doesn't mean becoming indifferent to everything. You can still have goals and ambitions, but the trick is to be mindful of how much power you're giving them. Do you own your desires, or do they own you? That's the question Seneca would ask. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can appreciate what you have, work towards what matters, but not be consumed by this constant hunger for more. A huge part of Stoic philosophy is learning to be content with less. The less you want, the more freedom you have. Think about it, when you're always longing for something, you're never really at peace. Your mind is always somewhere else, focused on what you don't have instead of enjoying the present moment. By reducing those cravings, you make room for stillness. You start to appreciate what's in front of you rather than what's out of reach. And here's the thing, desires will always be there. It's human nature to want things. But the Stoics teach that the key to mastering yourself is not letting those desires take control. You acknowledge them, but you don't let them drive the bus. You can want something and still be okay if you don't get it. That's where true freedom lies, in knowing that you can be content either way. When you limit your cravings, you free yourself from the chains of constant pursuit. You no longer tie your happiness to something external, something fleeting. Instead, you find contentment within, and that's something no desire can ever take away. And in that quiet space of enoughness, you discover a peace that all the riches, pleasures, and cravings in the world could never provide. Number 10. Practice gratitude regularly. Practicing gratitude regularly might seem like a soft idea at first glance. You might think, sure, I'm thankful for stuff, but does it really matter that much? According to Seneca and the Stoics, though, gratitude is way more than just saying thanks every now and then. It's a mindset, a way of life that keeps you grounded and gives you perspective. And it's crucial for mastering yourself. Why? Because when you focus on what you already have, you stop obsessing over what you don't. Gratitude isn't just a feel-good exercise. It's a way to remind yourself that, no matter what's going on, there are always things in your life that are enough. The Stoics believe that by focusing on those things, you build resilience against dissatisfaction. When you practice gratitude, you train your mind to zoom in on the positives, no matter how small. And in doing that, you shield yourself from the constant craving for more stuff, more recognition, more whatever. It's easy to overlook what's right in front of you. We're wired to want, to strive, to reach for the next thing. And while ambition isn't necessarily bad, it can get toxic when it blinds you to all the good that already exists in your life. This is where gratitude steps in as the antidote. It slows you down. It says, hey, take a moment and really see what you've got. Not just the big things, but the little things too. The ones you might brush off as insignificant. Stoics knew that it's those overlooked details, those small everyday comforts, that actually hold the key to contentment. When you make gratitude a regular practice, you start to shift your focus. Instead of constantly chasing after what's missing, you start appreciating what's present. And here's the magic: the more you focus on what you're grateful for, the less you feel the pull of desire. Your mind begins to settle. That restlessness that so often comes from wanting more, wanting better, wanting different, starts to fade. You realize that what you have, right here and now, is enough. But let's get one thing clear: gratitude isn't about pretending everything is perfect. The Stoics weren't naive. They knew life throws curveballs, and they didn't shy away from acknowledging the tough stuff. The difference is, they believed you could still find something to be thankful for, even in the middle of challenges. Gratitude, then, becomes a kind of armor. It doesn't block out hardship, but it does help you face it with a stronger, more resilient mindset. And here's the thing: gratitude doesn't require a grand gesture. You don't need a special ritual or a fancy journal to make it work. It's as simple as taking a pause in your day and asking yourself, what do I appreciate right now? Maybe it's something small. Maybe it's something you take for granted. But the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Over time, it shifts your entire outlook. When you practice gratitude regularly, you're not just counting your blessings, you're training your mind to find contentment in the present moment. And that's a powerful shift. It means you're no longer chasing happiness in some distant future. You're finding it right here, in the now. And for Seneca, that's where true mastery of the self begins. It's not in accumulating more, but in appreciating what's already within your grasp. Number 11, avoid idle talk and gossip. Avoiding idle talk and gossip might sound like a small thing, but in the Stoic way of life, it's a game changer. At first glance, it seems harmless. You're just chatting, maybe filling some awkward silence, or sharing a funny little story about someone. But Seneca and the other Stoics saw it differently. They believed that idle talk, especially gossip, distracts you from what really matters. It pulls you into shallow waters, where you waste time and energy on things that don't improve your life or your character. Here's the deal: gossip feels good in the moment. It's easy to get caught up in conversations about what someone else is doing, what mistakes they've made, or what's going wrong in their life. But the Stoics would ask, what does this do for you? Is it making you better? Is it helping you live in accordance with your values? Probably not. Gossip is like junk food for the mind. It's quick, it's tasty, but in the end, it doesn't nourish you. Instead, it leaves you feeling empty and, sometimes, a little guilty. Seneca would argue that when you engage in idle talk, you're actually giving away one of your most valuable resources, your attention. Think about it: every minute you spend discussing other people's lives is a minute you could have spent working on yourself. The Stoics weren't about filling the day with meaningless chatter. They were all about using their time wisely. They knew that words have power, and how you choose to spend your time in conversation says a lot about how you choose to live. Idle talk, at its core, is a distraction. It's a way to avoid dealing with your own stuff, your own challenges, your own growth. It's much easier to talk about someone else's problems than it is to face your own. But the Stoics knew that if you want to master yourself, you've got to face the hard stuff head-on. And gossip? It's just noise. It pulls you away from your path, your purpose. Now, this doesn't mean you should go through life in total silence or avoid casual conversations altogether. But it does mean being mindful of the quality of your conversations. Are they lifting you up? Are they helping you grow? Or are they just filling time with negativity and empty speculation? When you cut out idle talk, you free up mental space. You create room for deeper conversations, for learning, for thinking critically. You begin to notice how much more energy you have when you're not bogged down by meaningless chatter. Another thing the Stoics would say is that gossip not only distracts you, but it can also harm others. Talking behind someone's back, even if it's in a casual or joking way, can spread negativity. It puts out energy into the world that's not constructive, and that's not in line with the Stoic idea of living virtuously. Seneca would remind us that what we say about others often reflects more about us than it does about them. If you're constantly criticizing or judging, it might be time to look inward and ask why. So, the next time you're tempted to engage in gossip or mindless chatter, pause. Ask yourself, is this conversation helping me become a better person? Is it enriching my life or the lives of others? If the answer is no, you know what to do. Silence isn't a weakness. In fact, the Stoics believe that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply hold your tongue. It keeps you focused, it keeps you grounded, and it keeps you in control of your own mind. Avoiding idle talk isn't about isolating yourself from others, it's about choosing quality over quantity in your interactions. It's about speaking with intention, with purpose. And when you do that, you'll find that your words, your thoughts, and your actions are all aligned. That's where real mastery begins. Number 12, reframe suffering as opportunity. Suffering, it's the one thing that none of us can escape. At some point or another, we're all going to face hardship, pain, or disappointment. But here's the twist: what if suffering wasn't the enemy? What if instead of dreading it, you could actually see it as a kind of hidden opportunity? That's the magic of reframing suffering the Stoic way, especially how Seneca approached it. It's not about denying that pain exists. It's about flipping the script and looking at it from a new angle, seeing suffering as fertile ground for growth. Think about it like this: life throws obstacles at us, and our immediate instinct is to push them away, avoid them, and complain about how unfair it is. But in doing that, we miss out on the chance to evolve. Seneca teaches that suffering is a catalyst. Sure, it's uncomfortable, sometimes unbearable, but there's something powerful lurking beneath that discomfort. There's potential. Suffering, when looked at through a Stoic lens, is an invitation. An invitation to dig deeper into who you are, to sharpen your mind, and to cultivate resilience. It's easy to be content and calm when things are going your way, but true strength, real mastery of yourself, comes from how you handle life when it throws you into the storm. Seneca knew this, and he didn't run from hardship, he leaned into it. He saw it as a chance to test his philosophy, to apply what he had learned. And here's the thing, when you start to view suffering as opportunity, your entire perspective shifts. Instead of asking, "Why me?" or "How do I escape this?" you start to ask, "What can I learn here?" or "How can this make me stronger?" Those are game-changing questions. Suddenly, the discomfort isn't just something to endure, it's something to explore. It's almost like the universe handing you a personal challenge, one tailor-made to help you grow. There's also a mental freedom that comes with this shift in thinking. When you stop fearing suffering and start embracing it as a natural part of life, it no longer holds the same power over you. The fear of pain, of failure, or of hardship diminishes because you're not viewing it as an enemy anymore. You're seeing it for what it really is, a stepping stone. Every difficult moment, every setback, becomes an opportunity for you to build mental and emotional fortitude. But let's be clear, this doesn't mean that suffering is enjoyable or that you should seek it out. It's not about becoming numb to life's struggles. It's more about recognizing that those tough moments, the ones that feel overwhelming, are where the growth happens. They're like resistance training for your mind. The more you face them, the stronger you get. Seneca understood this so well that he believed suffering could actually be a gift. If you never experience pain or adversity, how will you ever know your true capabilities? How will you grow? By reframing suffering as an opportunity, you're not only mastering your external circumstances, but more importantly, you're mastering yourself. You're learning to stay calm in chaos, grounded in uncertainty, and resilient when life is anything but easy. So next time life throws you a curveball, before you react with frustration or despair, take a pause. Ask yourself how this moment can be an opportunity for growth. How can it teach you something about yourself? What strength is it asking you to cultivate? It's not about the suffering itself, it's about what you choose to do with it. Number 13. Protect your time. Protecting your time is one of those ideas that sounds obvious. Of course, you want to manage your time well. But the Stoics, particularly Seneca, took this concept to a whole new level. To them, time wasn't just a resource, it was the resource. You can lose money, you can lose things, but you can always get those back. Time? Once it's gone forever. That's why Seneca was so adamant about treating time with the highest level of care. It's easy to say, "Oh, I'll do that tomorrow," or "I've got plenty of time," but the truth is, we rarely appreciate how limited our time really is. Think about how often we let our time slip away without a second thought. We get caught up in distractions, meaningless tasks, or even just scrolling away the hours. Seneca would argue that this is one of the greatest forms of waste. When you let time slip through your fingers, you're essentially giving away the most valuable thing you possess. And not just giving it away, you're giving it away to things that don't even matter. It's easy to say yes to every request, every meeting, every social event. You might think, what's the harm? I have time. But when you say yes to everything, what you're really doing is saying no to your own priorities. The Stoics were all about being intentional with how they spent their days. Seneca, in particular, believed that mastering yourself meant mastering how you spend your time. Every choice you make about your time is either moving you closer to who you want to be, or pulling you further away. So how do you protect your time? Start by realizing that not every demand on your time is equal. Some things truly deserve your attention, but many do not. The Stoics would advise you to think deeply about what really matters and then guard those things fiercely. This might mean learning to say no more often or setting clear boundaries. At first, it might feel uncomfortable, but the reward is more time spent on what truly enriches you. Another Stoic principle is about being present with your time. So often, we're physically in one place but mentally somewhere else, thinking about tomorrow, or next week, or something that happened yesterday. But Seneca believed that you only truly own the time you're fully engaged with. That means being here, now, fully focused on what's in front of you. Not thinking ahead to the next task or worrying about what's already happened. Just being in the moment, whatever that moment may be. And here's something else. Protecting your time doesn't just mean cutting out distractions or saying no to things. It also means treating your free time with the same care. The Stoics weren't about grinding 24/7. They understood that rest, reflection, and even just taking time to breathe were essential to a balanced life. Seneca would remind us that idle time isn't wasted time if it's used wisely. At the end of the day, protecting your time is really about understanding that every moment is precious. It's about living with intention, making sure that the way you spend your hours lines up with what you truly value. Time, once spent, never returns. So the question you have to ask yourself is, am I using it well? Because when you protect your time, you're not just safeguarding a schedule, you're safeguarding your life. Number 14, make decisions slowly, act decisively. Making decisions is tricky business. We've all been there, caught in the swirl of uncertainty, trying to figure out the right path. In the pressure, it can make us rush into things, just to get the discomfort over with. But here's something that Seneca, the Stoic sage, understood well. When it comes to decisions, you should take your time. Slow down. Consider things from every angle. But once you make that choice, act like lightning. Move with purpose and clarity. That's the Stoic approach, deliberate in thought, decisive in action. Let's break that down. When faced with a decision, the first instinct might be to act fast. Get it done, avoid the stress of indecision. But in rushing, you risk making choices that aren't fully thought through. You miss the subtle details, the nuances that could change everything. Seneca's wisdom teaches us to slow the process of deciding. Not to drag it out indefinitely, but to give it the time and space it deserves. In this space, you're not being lazy or indecisive, you're simply being thorough. You're weighing your options, considering the consequences, and reflecting on what really matters. There's a calmness in this slow, deliberate process. It allows your mind to sift through emotions, filter out the noise, and focus on the essence of the decision. By taking the time to think deeply, you avoid impulsiveness, which often leads to regrets. Slow decision-making isn't about avoiding action, it's about making sure that when you do act, you do it with full conviction. Now, the other half of the equation is just as important. Once you've made your choice, you need to shift gears. No more hesitation, no second-guessing. You commit. Act decisively, and don't look back. This is where the Stoic strength shines. Once your mind is made up, there's no more room for doubt. You've done the hard thinking already, so now it's time to move with speed and certainty. And there's something liberating about this, too. When you make a decision slowly but act quickly, it creates a beautiful harmony between thought and action. You're not wasting energy bouncing between what-ifs and maybes. You've already done the mental work, so you can give yourself fully to the task at hand, knowing that your decision was made with clarity and intention. It's a bit like sharpening a sword. You don't rush through sharpening it, because you know the sharper it is, the more effective it will be when it's time to use it. The same applies to decisions. You take your time sharpening them, and when it's time to act, you strike swiftly and cleanly. One of the biggest traps we can fall into is either acting too fast without thinking things through, or getting stuck in overthinking, never acting at all. The Stoic way offers a balance. Thoughtfulness and decisiveness go hand in hand. It's not enough to just be reflective, you need to be willing to move. And it's not enough to just be action-oriented, you need to know where you're going before you leap. Seneca's approach teaches us that the best decisions come when we harmonize these two forces. By being patient in our deliberation and bold in our execution, we align ourselves with a kind of inner wisdom. It's like moving through life with a steady hand on the wheel, turning slowly when necessary, but hitting the gas with full confidence once the road is clear. So the next time you're wrestling with a decision, don't rush. Give yourself the gift of time. But when you've made your choice, go all in. Move forward with that sharp focus that only comes when thoughtfulness meets action. Number 15. Write letters to yourself as self-instruction. Writing letters to yourself as a form of self-instruction is a practice that's often overlooked, but Seneca was all about it. Why? Because there's something powerful about taking the time to sit down and communicate directly with yourself. It's like having a conversation with your own mind, where you can sift through your thoughts, give yourself advice, and lay out your own path forward. The act of writing creates clarity. It forces you to organize the mess of thoughts swirling in your head into something coherent, something you can actually work with. When you write letters to yourself, you're not just talking about what's happening now, you're guiding your future self. You're saying, hey, here's what's important. Here's what you need to remember when things get tough. It's like leaving little breadcrumbs for yourself, so that when you inevitably get lost or caught up in the chaos of life, you have something to come back to, a reminder of what really matters. Seneca believed that writing things down helped solidify them in your mind. It's easy to get swept up in the noise of daily life, to lose track of your principles or get distracted by the latest drama. But when you write, you create something tangible, something you can return to when the mental fog rolls in. It's your own personal guidebook, written by the person who knows you best, you. What makes writing to yourself even more valuable is that it forces you to slow down. We live in such a fast-paced world that it's easy to jump from one thought to the next without ever really stopping to think. But when you write, especially when you're writing to yourself, you have to pause. You have to reflect. And that's where the magic happens. You start to see patterns in your thinking, recognize where you're tripping up, and identify areas where you need to focus more attention. Another benefit of writing letters to yourself is that it provides a safe space for self-instruction. There's no judgment, no external influence, just you, having an honest conversation with yourself. You can be as blunt, encouraging, or philosophical as you need to be. If you're struggling with something, write about it. If you've learned something valuable, put it on paper. If you need a reminder to stay grounded, jot that down too. These letters aren't for anyone else's eyes, they're just for you. And that makes them incredibly powerful. But here's the thing, these letters don't have to be long, formal essays. They can be quick notes, short reflections, or even bullet points. The key is that they're intentional. You're taking time to coach yourself, to be your own mentor. Over time, you might start to notice how your thoughts evolve, how your mindset shifts, and how these letters become a roadmap for your personal growth. At the end of the day, writing letters to yourself is about more than just putting words on a page. It's about creating space to think deeply, to self-reflect, and to offer yourself the guidance you often seek from others. The Stoics believed in self-reliance, and what better way to cultivate that than by giving yourself the advice you know you need? So grab a pen, sit down, and write to the one person who's always going to be with you, you. Thanks for joining me on this journey through Seneca's Stoic wisdom. If you found these 15 tips valuable, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more insights on mastering your mind and living a more resilient life. Remember, true mastery starts within, and these principles are just the beginning. Drop a comment below with which tip resonated the most with you, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay strong and stay stoic.